Dr. Mohammed Shiraz, thank you for inviting me to speak to your students at the English Department of the International Islamic University. Hi students, I wish I could see your fresh young faces, but another time maybe, perhaps on Skype. I'm so glad Professor Shiraz is teaching Ice Candy Man. It is considered one of my best books, and it is the story of Partition. I was about 8 or 9 years old during the events of Partition in Lahore. I was in Lahore. And I have certain memories, like I heard non-stop the chanting of mobs from a distance. It was Sat Sri Akal, Bole So Nihal from the Sikhs, Hare Hare Mahadev from the Hindus, Allahu Akbar from the Muslims, and I knew the mobs were up to no good. They were killing people. I heard a lot of screams and shouting, and even as a child, I felt a little threatened, and I felt that my family and we were under threat. What really decided me to write Ice Candy Man was to tell the story of what happened mainly to the women. At times of anarchy, of war, when everything is disheveled, it seems women wear a bigger brunt of the turmoil. They are used, their bodies are used to celebrate victory on, to humiliate the people they are against, the people, the tribe, the religion. They want to insult everybody on a woman's body, it seems. And also to celebrate victory on a woman's body. Anyway, as I was growing up, I heard hush-hush whispers between my mother and my aunts. And I knew they were talking about somebody's mother-in-law or somebody's sister or a mother, but I didn't know what they were saying. As I became older, I realized they were talking of the atrocities of the hundreds of thousands of women kidnapped, the Hindu women by the Muslims, the Muslim women by the Hindus and Sikhs, and terrible atrocities were performed on their bodies. They were sold for 10 rupees each. They were, some of them became sort of wives and joined households. Anyway, this is their story. In Ice Candy Man, I have taken Shanta, who is the heroine, as a symbol who stands, and all the friends who sit around her as the symbols which stand for the various communities and for India and what was happening at the time. Their talk reveals what occurred. The politics of the situation was revealed through them. There's an important thing I want to tell you, that this book has Lenny speaking in many voices. She starts off as a child, then she becomes an adolescent, and at times a much more sophisticated adult voice is introduced, and that is of the grown-up Lenny. When I thought of writing this book on Partition, the first scene that occurred to me was that I was walking to school with my gardener when we saw a gunny sack on our path. The gardener just kicked the closed gunny sack, and a very young dead man spilled half out of it, and half his body was in the sack. I realized much later that what I was seeing was a much shorter part of the body because the legs had been severed. Anyway, this is the scene that struck me. Another scene that struck me was that when we were, at that time, a mob had sort of driven into a house on Riots, shouting slogans. And I remember very clearly my mother standing outside with her hands on my and my brother's head to face the mob. At that time, a policeman, our cook, came out of the kitchen, which was right in front of the house, and he said, "What do you haramzadas think you're up to?" And they said, "Well, the name on the gate is Bhandara, and that's a Hindu name, and we have come to loot this house because it's not been looted before." And the cook said, "Haramzadas, this is a Parsi house. Bhandara is also a Parsi name. So he gave them glasses of water to drink, a Musliman among the Muslims, and they quietly, chanting, drove away. Now, in telling the story of the ice candy man, I don't know what I should talk about. I told you what inspired me to write this. We did have, before the partition, we had a lot of Hindu and Sikh neighbors. And it seemed that almost overnight, the whole geography of the town of Lahore changed. Our neighbors kept their belongings with us. They thought they will come back to collect their belongings. They thought this partition and the riots will soon be over and things will settle back. But as you know, it didn't happen, and they never came to recover their belongings. After writing Ice Candy Man, some of my childhood friends who belonged to the Sikh community with an American mother, they recognized themselves in the book and got in touch with me, which was very pleasing. I wish I had some questions from you which you'd like to know, which you would want me to answer, because it's very difficult to just talk at random about what I was doing. Well, at that time, when I started to write, I was writing by hand on notebooks. Then I would sort of correct it and make it fair. I would use an old Olivetti typewriter to type it on, and then a very sweet friend of mine, Nargis Subani, would come and make a fairer copy of it. By the time I wrote this book, I had already written The Bride and The Crow Eaters. It took many rejection notes from England and America for me to be published. And most of the notes said, "Who is interested in remote Pakistan? Otherwise, we love her writing." But eventually I was published in 1980. My first book was, the first book they published was The Crow Eaters, and then they published The Bride. And then I finished Ice Candy Man, and they published Ice Candy Man when I had moved to America, although I wrote it all in Lahore, mostly in my houses, in two houses. A house in, open the door, the dog is crying.